Up. It usually takes a minute or two for the announcement of a live broadcast to go out to everybody so that if they aren't sitting here waiting, they'll join us here in just a second or two. Oh, my hair. Golly. Used to have such nice hair when I was younger. But then again, I had to keep it military cut. So, that's the way that goes. Any news on the elections? Maybe we can get this done fairly quickly this evening and give us a chance to watch that. Let me do a real quick check here. See if there's anything up here. Oh, Sarah Huckabee Sanders projected to become Arkansas's first ever female governor.
Sarah Sanders?
Yep. Governor Huckabee's daughter. Thank you very much, LG. I appreciate that. Well, we're getting up close to where I'm going to have 5,000 subscribers, so I'm kind of acquiring some things to give away in a drawing once we get to 5,000. And gosh, I tell you what, those of you who have been here a long part of the ways, thank you so much. And thank you for recommending me to others. Greatly appreciated. And, but if only I can find a way to reward you for that as well. But we'll see what happens here in the near future. I've got 2 more orders to come in before I do my next pantry haul video. Got 1 more nutrient survival, and then my monthly Thrive Life. Now, Thrive has been, shipping about 2 to 3 weeks behind schedule, so that may not come in. I haven't gotten a notification from them yet. That order was put in on the 4th, and I haven't even gotten notification that they've started picking it yet. So, they're selling an awful lot, and they've diminished a lot of the products that they used to have. They used to have like 4 different kinds of cheeses, and now they're down to just 1 or 2. Used to have 2 different kinds of creams. Now they're just down to heavy cream. And I mean, they've really cut short a lot of their products. I'd say there's probably been a 30% reduction in what they have as far as products over the course of the last 2 years. And but they did add 1 new one, the shrimp, that I really, really like. So, that's a good point there. Okay. It's 3 minutes after, so that gives people enough time to join us if they're going to be joining us. So let's start off with chapter 7, which is about gardens and livestock. So he starts off by recommending that a 25 by 30 foot garden is the best size he recommends for a family of 4. He also recommends Mel Bartholomew's square foot gardening. This is the 2nd edition. I can't find my 1st edition. It's probably in a box out in the garage. I bought it when we were stationed in Arizona, and I had 85% of my yard was gravel, and in the backyard I had a 20 by 40 piece of grass, and then I had a small gardening area based off of Mel's square foot gardening. The one thing that I found grew extremely well in southern Arizona were strawberries. We had strawberries like you would not believe. But this is a fantastic concept, and how you can maximize production of crops on a very small scale. Yeah, and like some of the fruits and vegetables that we would normally get, we can no longer access. So they just don't make them anymore. Don't have sweet cherries. Oh, several things that we used to get. But I think that's just, they probably focus on what can they freeze dry quickest and get the best markup on, and keep themselves going as far as sustainability. He also mentions a couple other fantastic books, and I'm going to have to order these for myself at some point in the future. I'm going to add them to my, these are the books I would like list for my family to get me for Christmas or birthday. But Gardening When It Counts, Growing Food in Hard Times by Steve Solomon, that's pretty much directed at the backyard homesteader, the survivalist, hunker down, preparedness type person. He also talks about the best bang for the buck in a small acreage, backyard garden is going to be to grow barley. Now, if you'll remember, barley and rye are probably the two crops that caused the Black Plague back in the Middle Ages. They got wet and caused a certain disease, and but they do produce an awful lot for a very small acreage. Addie, quiet, sweetheart. And so they're pretty good for a small acreage. I was doing an investigation. I found a real good book, and there's a guy online. Gosh, I forget his name. He's half Filipino, but he has a really great channel here online. I'll put the link when we do when this comes out and gets republished. But he was saying that it takes a 20-foot by 40-foot patch of wheat to make one loaf of bread. So, so growing wheat, if you're trying to do, have flour and stuff for your backyard, then your backyard is not going to be big enough to have more than just one loaf of wheat. You've got to have a very large crop of wheat. Corn would be a little bit more sustainable. But then again, you've got to pollinate the corn. You got to make sure that it's available because they drop down onto those corn membranes that stick out of the ear. That's what absorbs the pollen so that it can fertilize those seeds inside the ear. And so you have to be very, very careful, make sure you have a lot of good corn in one area in order to have that be kind of prolific. Hi, Steele, welcome. Yes, so that's what he's saying. Barley has very good nutritional benefits for the amount that you're allowed to grow. Another one that is very high in nutritional value for the amount that you can grow in small space is going to be oats. So that can also be a good one. From there, he goes into talking on the next page about tools that he would recommend. He says that most of the tools, unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away from hand tools. They were a lot easier to find 40, 50 years ago than they are now, like a scythe and other things. But he recommends, going to estate sales or to antique sales or whatever the case is. He recommends a corn knife and a husking peg. Now, a husking peg is basically, if you look at the common pictures of the Amish, they have this rake that has a cross beam, and then it has maybe only six downward spikes as a rake, and that's a husking peg. An aluminum flat grain shovel, and a corn drag, which is pretty much like a husking peg. I'm sorry, no, the husking peg is what you wear on your hand, and then the corn drag is the one that has what I was describing, type of a rake. There we go. Gosh. Hello, Mr. Graves. Welcome from Colorado. One of my favorite channels, Prepping by Faith, is also from Colorado. So we do have a very good channel there that we follow. I recommend her. So, he talks about the tools that you need to have. And, and I have gone out and bought extra tools just in case some break. So I've got the new aluminum grain shovel only because That's a very good scooping shovel for gravel, for grain, for clearing off the driveway, all different kinds of things. I've got two D-handled shovels, a short one and a long one. Got a new rake, got a new hoe or two. I bought all kinds of new gardening tools. So I have one entire set of brand new out on one corner of the yard than the ones I use on an everyday basis in another portion of the yard. That way I know for sure I'm going to have plenty of garden tools available to me should anything happen. Hello, Social Dilemma. Welcome. So I recommend you do the same. Now you can get gardening tools at estate sales or other things. You can also get them fairly well at some of the St. Paul de Vincent and St. Vincent de Paul. Gosh, nothing like getting dyslexic. St. Vincent de Paul or Goodwill. They quite often will have pretty good deals on gardening tools as well that people have donated. So another thing he's concerned about is keeping varmints out. And I wish I could open this back door and show you what's happened to my cabbage. So I've got some cabbage rot, and it's a insect, and so you have to use a spray for that. But realize that there aren't once SHTF happens, there probably won't be as many gardening supply stores. You won't have the Lowe's or the Home Depots or anything like that. You won't have Walmart. You won't have Bartholomew's gardening center here in town. A lot of these things will go away. So that expertise about how to take care of your plants and keep them bug-free, disease-free, and everything else, that expert advice is not going to be there, nor are the proper chemicals to treat them as such. So now is a good time to study up and acquire what you need as far as insecticides and herbicides and things like that, especially those that are not toxic, that are safe to spray on food plants. And so that's what I would concentrate on, making sure you have plenty of that. He also says you need to keep varmints away from your food as you grow it. I got beautiful tomatoes, but the birds get them. So I need a bird net over my tomatoes. And that's one example. Then you've got the ground ones. Rabbits love to dig up onions. Carrots, and some of the others, bulb turnips. They're good rabbit fodder as well. So what are all the different threats that you have as far as varmints to your crops? So he recommends sturdy fences, getting some cats to take care of the rats. So you want ratters. Putting out traps for some of the other varmints. You don't want to trap a skunk though. Oh, that's terrible. 22 rimfire rifle, or if you are not allowed to have a rifle in where you live, then he recommends a pellet rifle. And as a matter of fact, I went looking for a good pellet rifle today. But I don't know which one I should get. There's a .177 caliber and a .22 caliber. And so I don't know which one I should get, but I'll probably talk to somebody here in the near future. Yes, sharpening your hoe, especially your hoe, your shovel, and some of the others does make them a lot more effective. But once you do that, also oil them. Use vegetable oil in order to keep the rust off of them, because once you've got them nice and sharp, remember now you've exposed that, so that's going to be it's no longer covered with anything that's protective, so it's going to be exposed to the weather, and that's going to cause it to rust. If you look at my last haul video, I bought some Rust-Oleum anti-rust or some rust remover. And that's one of my main concerns is, keeping rust off of all of my implements and making sure I take good care of them. So make sure you take care of that as well. Make sure you get something really good as far as removing rust and something really good as far as protecting it from rust. So 5-in-1 oil is really good for protecting from rust and rubbing a thin coat of that on something. Vegetable oil for anything you're going to be using as far as edibles, and That's, 5-in-1 oil, WD-40. There's a lot of good solutions out there. Just make sure that anything you're going to use, it's going to come in contact with edible vegetables or plants, that you have something that is safe, should it come in contact with your food, that you can use it. Oh, Butch says he has a 177 nitro for shooting small birds, rabbits, and a 22 caliber nitro for larger animals. Looking at getting a 50 cal for the big ones, all nitro or PCP. Wow. So basically you're saying, from what I'm reading, you're recommending that I get both 177 and 22. Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. I had a one of those, the handle Red Ryder BB guns when I was a kid, and that's about the extent that I got into it. But I recently watched a video here on YouTube, and there's a guy who has a night scope, and he shoots rats at night and makes a profit off of it. Just unbelievable. So then he also talks about natural pest killers, like making sure you have a good supply of ladybugs, lace wings, praying mantis, and they'll keep a lot of the other. So these are kind of predator insects that eat the larvae and other insects that are eating your foliage, like cabbage or whatever. He also recommends getting a plastic owl and setting it up to keep birds away from your crops. When I was HR director at the homeless shelter downtown, there was we had everything in the world imaginable to try to keep the pigeons off of the edges of the roofs and the windowsills, so that they wouldn't poop on the homeless, who had a tendency to congregate outside the building. And so we had plastic owls up everywhere, and then we had these little spiked strips that went along everything to that would basically poke the birds that's trying to land and disincentivize it from landing, but nothing worked. I mean, the grackles, the crows, the ravens, they're all going to do what they want to do. But he recommends here getting plastic owls. Yes, and that's absolutely correct. And so, and in the book, he stresses, 22 caliber rimfire is a fantastic weapon to have if it's authorized where you are, and if you can use it for pests and everything else. And if not, then he recommends the air rifles. Now, remember that we're talking about a post-SHTF environment. So a lot of times, those restrictions that we have, whether it be homeowner associations or city ordinances or stuff like that, in a place where we are without rule of law, WROL, those have become usable because they may have been unusable in the past because of city code or sanctions or whatever. But once that rule of law goes away, then they become usable. Yes, Gay, you can use old oil on your tools, old vegetable oil. As a matter of fact, that's the best way to use it, is put your old vegetable oil that you aren't going to reuse to good use by protecting your tools. He talks about getting dwarf fruit trees and then putting them on wheels and buckets on wheels. And in case of a freeze or something like that, you can pull them inside. A lot of them are not cold tolerant, especially a lot of the, what do they call them? Lemons and limes and what's that called? Citrus trees. They don't tolerate cold that well. So you want to have them. That's the reason you're having dwarf, is so that they can fit inside a container on wheels. You can bring inside the house or garage to keep them where they aren't going to be exposed to freezing temperatures. And then you also, if you're going to do that, the pollinating period is usually when it's way too cold for them outside. So you're going to have to artificially pollinate them, and that's something that he is kind of mentions in the book and talks about quite extensively. Then he also talks about doing your own sprouts, and that when you're doing sprouts or microgreens, there's an awful lot of nutrition that you can acquire from a very small crop. So he strongly recommends getting microgreens and other things like that. One of the things he talks about a lot is make sure you get some good survival seeds, and make sure you want to get heirloom seeds. Heirloom seeds are the ones that when they do produce follow-on seeds from that crop, you can use them and replant and have a self-sustaining crop over time. Whereas with a lot of the GMO seeds that we have nowadays that you're going to get at Walmart and places like that, they may not have that good of a seed. And even when they do produce a seed, it may not germinate as effectively as you want. So check into getting some heirloom seeds. In the book, he has about 2 pages where he goes through fantastic suppliers of not only old equipment, but also where you can get some good heirloom seeds. When we talk about livestock and things like that, he says make sure that you can find animals that are going to be dual or triple purpose, and that's going to be your best bet. One of the examples he gives for dual or triple purpose is, make sure you get a cow because cattle can be used both for meat as well as for milk. Chickens are another good one where you can either cook the chicken or you can keep it and have them lay eggs. There's a certain breed he talks about in the book that he prefers, and it doesn't brood on its own eggs. So it's been kind of inbred over time to where all they do is lay eggs for you, and then they leave the eggs for you. They don't even brood those eggs. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yes, lentils would be fantastic to try to sprout. And they also are very nutrient dense. And then on page 139, he has a whole bunch of recommendations on how I, as a novice, if you're a novice, what we can get some good books on pigs, goats, sheep, ducks, beef, raising cattle, all this kind of stuff in a very small area. And so, there's some great books out there that teaches us how to be miniature farmers on a suburban backyard. And so he talks about that. Another one of those dual or triple purpose that he talks about a lot are the advantages of emu and sheep and having those available to you. Now, of course, sheep are going to produce wool, but they're also going to produce meat. And then another good one is goats. Now, I will tell you, goats are extremely cantankerous. Not only can they produce meat, but they can also produce good milk. So that's another one of those dual purpose ones you want to consider. But take a look into what kind of things can you do that are double and triple purpose. And any other comments before we move on to chapter 8, which is medical and medical supplies? Any thoughts or anything about gardening and livestock raising in a post-SHTF environment? Any personal recommendations? Butch gave us the air gun, some advice on air guns. LG is going to try to raise sprout some lentils. Steele is saying that Rhode Island Reds and Barred Rocks are the 2 that dual purpose chickens we have, but for now they're just for the eggs they produce. I can understand that. I can understand that totally. Okay. And I don't even know. We used to have a kind of like the Tractor Supply, but it was only for this area. And there was a local company, and that's where I took my lawnmower to get it repaired all the time. They went under. But I know there were certain times a year when they had pigs, when they had chicks, when they had everything that was necessary for farmers. But each thing had its own season, and they would have those things out. And when they had those things out, I kind of enjoyed looking at them, but I knew I wasn't going to get one. They sold out, they sold the land, and now that's an academy. So that piece of property is no longer selling what it did. I imagine Tractor Supply can probably get chickens I don't know if they sell pigs or not, but that would be worth checking into, I guess. Let me see here. If you get a cow, you have to access a bull once a year. Yeah, that's true. Acer, you bring up a very good point, and that is, you know, um, the whole idea behind Shemitah, which is, and the same thing behind a holy day. Every seventh day, don't work, rest yourself. Every seventh year, rest the land. Uh, every, every couple of years, you want to fallow your land and your animals and take care of them. We work the land, we work ourselves, we work the animals for 6, and then let them rest the 7th. So, very good point. Thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for bringing that up. Seed to seed, and let me look up what that is here real quick. Let me go to Amazon. Seed to Seed book by Susan Ashworth. Yeah, fantastic, and it's available on Amazon. $22.46. So good recommendation. Thank you. I will add that to my list of books that I want as well. And I think that pollination and collecting, drying, preserving seeds is going to be critical here in the very near future. So I think that's a very important part of the entire cycle that you cover very well there. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Okay, so now we're going to get into Chapter 8, Medical Supplies and Training. And so he recommends 2 things, and part of first aid is get yourself fit. I think I'm fairly fit. I was fairly fit until I broke my hip, and now I've gotten bad news that I broke my neck and my back in the Army, and so I received disability for that. And I was so upset because my wife, she didn't have anywhere close when she had her total hip replacement. She had nowhere close to the same pain. And here it is 5 months later, I'm still using a cane to walk. And she was, running basically after the end of a month and a half. But the surgeon said, we had the same surgeon. He says, don't compare your recovery to your husband's because you're totally different people. And she was in the 1% as far as recovery. He considers me more average. And so I was really upset because I was having this intense pain right where they drill inside the femur, the marrow of the femur, and then they put that titanium shank down inside so that the muscles can grow around it and the bone can encase it. And I was having extreme pain. So finally I went to a pain management doctor, and he found out that those discs that I bummed up in the Army have gotten even worse. And so it's pinching on that nerve, and that nerve is what's causing the pain in my legs, not necessarily the surgeon. So I owe him an apology and have to let him know that, yeah, he did everything he could. Hi, Linda, welcome. And, that I'm getting acupuncture now, and I have another session tomorrow. So the acupuncture is doing an awful lot to help with that pain. I'm also on a new pill. Ooh, I forgot that. I was supposed to take it 3 times today, and I forgot to take the lunchtime. Oh, well, things happen. But anyhow, he talks about get first aid training. If you have, and look it up in online, see if your area has what's called CERT, C-E-R-T, and that's the Community Emergency Response Team. It's fully funded by FEMA. I got a complete backpack, travel kit, helmet, everything from CERT. And then I got some of the best, and mind you, I've been doing this for a long time. I got some of the best first aid training I've ever received through FEMA and CERT. They had one class that they brought in called Stop the Bleed. They had a dummy. You got to actually stick your hand down inside of this dummy and feel for the femoral artery and push it off with your fingers and then pack the wound and get it to stop bleeding. So you learned how to pack wounds to stop bleeding. And just the best training I've ever had in my life. Look for CERT and see if you can't join a CERT team near you and get the free training. Just professional. I also had Red Cross training, of course, Army training, Boy Scout training. But of all of that, the CERT training was absolutely the best free first aid training I've ever had in my life. And then, of course, I was talking about getting fit, and right now, my problem's with my back. That's limiting my fitness, but hopefully that will be resolved here very shortly. Good ad there, Mr. Rubram. And as a matter of fact, our extension office is only 300 yards from my house. So our county agricultural extension. So I'm very lucky that they are that close. And then, of course, we have the A&M test center is within a quarter of a mile. So we have a lot of good agricultural resources available to us here, and I strongly recommend you check into yours as well. The same thing with if you check with your here it's Texas Agriculture and Wildlife and the parks, but they do have classes, for example, on how to field dress items, animals that you kill when hunting or trapping, and so you can get all kinds of free training, usually from the state or from the federal government, on most of the things that we're talking about: hunting, trapping, fishing, first aid, etc. Talks about the kit, and make sure you have, that a sprained ankle can basically keep you from evacuating because you're immobile, that a minor cut can go sepsis, and you can die from it basically once the sepsis gets into your bloodstream. And so you want to make sure you take care of that with good antibiotics. And then diarrhea, of course, can kill. It can start out very, very small, expand, and then you can be completely dehydrated. So he talks about, make sure you plan for the simple, because the simple can become the extreme over a very rapid time if you don't care for it properly. And I've got some things I'll show you here in just a minute. So he talks about getting some tincture of benzoin, which is a sticky disinfectant. So let me tell you, you're going to need an applicator to put it on. I guess the closest thing I would equate it to would be sort of like icing on a cinnamon roll. And you're going to dab it on and rub it onto the skin. Not only does it cleanse the skin and put on a layer of antibacterial, but it also causes any kind of an adhesive bandage to adhere better. So I keep it in my first aid kit because if I'm going to use Steri-Strips or butterfly closures, if I put a little bit of tincture of benzoin on either side of the cut to protect it from the bacteria, and then pinch it closed and then close out with, let's say, a Steri-Strip, then I know that Steri-Strip is going to stay intact because, usually if you put it just straight on the skin, it could come loose, hair, something else could get in the way. But with tincture of benzoin, it's going to stick, guaranteed. Hello, my prepper journey. Welcome. New York or my prepper journey. My problem is the exact opposite of yours. So I have what's called hemochromatosis, and so I have too much iron in my blood. So once a quarter, I have to go in and donate a pint of blood to have it thrown away, just to get rid of the iron in my blood. So eating too much red-blooded stuff, I can't eat kidney or liver or anything like that at all. But so basically, hemochromatosis is too much iron, and anemia is not enough iron. So they're the exact opposites of each other. I wish we could equalize each other out. Okay, he talks about making sure that you have a whole bunch of other things like antibiotics, some Benadryl, topical Benadryl. If you can get one of these, get one of these. I strongly recommend it. Talk to your doctor, see if you can't get a prescription. Even with my outstanding insurance, so I have Medicare and TRICARE and VA, and charging it against all three, I still ended up paying $25 for the Sterapin or EpiPen. I'm sorry. But you know, if you can get an EpiPen, because you never know what you're going to come up with as far as allergies, get some ibuprofen, aspirin, Imodium will to help with the diarrhea. Rehydration, he recommends that you get either Pedialyte or Gatorade. And he said that once you mix the Gatorade, when you're dealing with diarrhea, then kind of have the Gatorade diluted a little bit. So if you have 2 bottles of Gatorade, you know, one empty bottle and one bottle, pour the other bottle, make it half and half, and then fill up with water. So you've diluted it 50%. That makes for a fantastic rehydration piece of equipment for your toolkit. Okay, then he talks about a couple other things. Let me show you these here. He talks about a SAMS plant. So I got this on Amazon. What it is this is a piece of aluminum, and it's very flexible until you curl it. If you can see here, you curl it into a tube, or you can bend it at right angles, at which point then it becomes rigid. And it does have a nice little padding on it that goes against the broken area. And then you have these Curlex bandages to hold that in place should there be a broken wound. So that's the SAM splint. He talks about making sure you have a good CPR mask. And I recommend that you get a CPR mask. That way, if you're giving CPR to somebody who has a communicable disease, you don't have mouth-to-mouth contact or mouth-to-nose, whichever way you're going to do it. This way, you've got instruments which are going to be, you're going to cover their face. You're going to have a tube that is one way, so you're blowing into them and it doesn't come back out to you. So it's just a safety measure for you, especially if you're like I am and a member of CERT and we don't know who we're going to be helping. We go into a disaster and we just start administering first aid. You don't know the health conditions or anything else, so you want to protect yourself as much as possible. A suction kit. We also talk about wound cleansing in this portion. So you can get these either at your local grocery store, or you can get them at Walmart. You can get them online. But both of these are pressurized wound washes. So this one is under pressure inside the bottle. So you just squirt on the top, and it has a small stream of pressurized water. It comes out and washes the wound, because remember, you want to remove anything and everything you can from that wound, because that's a foreign object that's going to cause infection. This one you control by the spray pump handle. And so this is just a straight wound cleanser and sterile saline water. The amount of pressure is by the pump. Another option for you, and I actually bought this for a different purpose. This is going to be basically our bidets should we run out of toilet paper. But then this can also be used as a wound wash if you fill it up with sterile water, and you can just cleanse the wound by squeezing the bottle and washing it that way. So that's a multi-use tool. We have probably a half dozen of the laboratory squeeze bottles, so we can use them for both our personal cleansing, sanitation, and we can also use it for the cleansing of a wound. Different bottles, of course. Burn Creed silver sulfadiazine is also good to have, and absolutely. When so a little while back, I did a video on things to have because of a nuclear explosion. So the first thing that happens in a nuclear explosion, of course, is you're going to be exposed to intense heat and light, and that's going to be the burns. So you got to make sure you have plenty of burn care. So that's going to be dry dressings and then bandages loosely wrapped to keep the bandage in place. You're going to want to make sure you have plenty of antibiotics, which is where stuff like this comes into play. You're going to want to make sure that you rehydrate the person, which is where the Pedialyte, the Gatorade, the IV fluids, there's one called IV hydration. That's one I use. It's a powder, and then it comes in a little tube, and one tube per liter of water. And I think it's called liquid IV or IV hydration or something. I'll put the link when we get this printed or published. and you can take a look at it there. But there's two major brands, and both of them are really good. So you want to make sure you hydrate the body. So that's the first step, is you're going to be burned. And we're saying that you've survived the blast itself. So first is going to be burns. The next one's going to be concussive effects. So that's going to be either throwing your body, liquid IV, thank you. So that's either going to be throwing your body against something, and then you're going to have some concussion type wounds, or it could be things thrown on you. Now, when they're thrown on you, that can either be a concussion or a compression fracture. It can also be a puncture wound. It could be a laceration, things like that. So now that's the second phase of things we have to take into consideration for taking care of somebody who's been in a nuclear explosion. The third thing is taking care of the nuclear exposure themselves. So, have they been exposed to nuclear radiation? And one of the things is, if they vomit profusely, or if they start having blood coming out of their eyes, nose, mouth, or rectum within the first hour after exposure to nuclear radiation, then it is fatal, and they probably aren't going to make it. So make them as comfortable as you can while they go through that journey. But otherwise, within 24 hours, you can give them a little bit of protection with potassium iodide. That's going to protect the thyroid gland from cancer. And then you're going to want to make sure you keep them hydrated and cover any wounds or anything else. One thing I want to make sure we're straight on, a couple pieces of terminology. A dressing is something you place over the wound like that to keep it from bleeding. And then a bandage is what you're going to use to wrap around the dressing, or a bandage could also be tape to hold the dressing in place. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that terminology, dressing versus bandage. Well, I have 8 mil plastic and duct tape to seal my windows. And also another thing you got to consider is seal the input from your air conditioner and heating system, because if that automatically turns on or anything else, that's also going to be another way where they can get in. So let me first make sure we're all on the same sheet of music as this as well. So the radioactive fallout, remember, so far we've had almost 2,800 nuclear explosions on the face of the earth. Most people forget that. So when we take a look at the nuclear exchange, we've already had more than that, exploded on the earth, and we're still here. Only 25% of Hiroshima and Nagasaki died of the explosion there, as well as some of the follow after effects. So 25 to 33% of the population died. The rest of them survived. Now, yes, we have improved, and they're a lot more effective and a lot more efficient in their killing. That's a terrible thing to say, but it is survivable. And so, just if you plan ahead, you can survive it. So one of the things we have to understand is, when it is a ground burst, that's when you're going to have the greatest amount of radioactive fallout, because what it does is it irradiates the ground underneath and disperses it up into the air, and then the winds aloft carry that. Now, it's a hot thing right now. Remember, it's the heat of the sun, basically, and it's going to carry up. So that's what lifts heavy things up into the air, is they're so hot that they're rising up into the air. Hot things rise. Then as they cool, then they're falling down to Earth. What we have noticed with the 2,800 or so nuclear explosions that we had so far is that the particles, the radioactive particles, the dust, is about the size of rice. Okay. So you want to keep from inhaling that. You don't want to get it inside your body. So you want to keep, have a mask on so it doesn't get inside your body or inside your ears, your eyes, or anything like that. If you can protect those areas, you're pretty good. The rest of it, you can kind of get off. Now, the radioactivity itself, remember, these are only carriers of the radioactivity. The radioactivity itself, the gamma rays, there are only three things that are going to protect you. Time, because of the half-life of it. Within 24 hours, it's only going to be half the potency it was at the beginning in most cases. Distance, the farther away you are from the blast, the better off you are because, of course, it takes time to get to you, so it's going to go through that half-life. And then shielding, the amount of mass that you have between it and you. So if you can keep those rice-sized particles from coming into your house through your air ducts and broken windows and things, and keep that outside and keep some mass in between the two of you, sandbags, concrete, lead, earth, whatever the case is, the better off you're going to be. We used to think we'd have to stay in a fallout shelter for about 2 weeks after a nuclear explosion. Now they're saying that it'll probably be safe to go outside within 3 to 4 days. I guess we'll see over time. Let's get back into the official thing here. One of the other things that it mentions in the book, and you might want to take into consideration, is and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in sanitation, which we're coming up to next, is get some body bags. So this is a body bag. It has a zipper, and if you're not using it as a body bag, there are 6 handles on it. So in the closed, when you have it closed, it's strong enough even when it's open, but and put somebody inside and then zip it up. But as long as it's in the closed, you've got double thickness, and you can use it as a stretcher. So it makes for a fantastic stretcher. And then, of course, if you need to, then you can put somebody inside and zip it up, and that's going to help you avoid some of the putrefaction and other things that happen to the body after it's deceased. So that is something you might want to take into consideration getting into your kit, a body bag for or 2 or 3. And then we talked about sanitation. So the first thing he gets into is something that we just have to take into consideration is that feminine hygiene products, when they're used, we have to dispose of those. And of course, most of them have some sort of a cotton component to them, very easy to burn. So establishing a burn pile somewhere, preferably within outside of a 100-foot radius of where you're going to be staying, those are very easy to dispose of. Just throw them in a burn pile and burn them. The next one after that is he talks about other waste disposal, the same thing. You want to keep those at least 100 feet away from you. And he talks about garbage and fecal matter can both be burned. As a matter of fact, if you were in trouble with the first sergeant in the Army, that's what you got. That's the duty you had, because we use these big 55-gallon oil drums, and you go into them. And then if you're on his, and we call it the doo-doo list, only a different word, that meant that you got the duty that week of taking that 55-gallon drum and dumping it into a slit trench, pouring some diesel on it, and then burning it. Now, we have found now, 50 years later, that the odors, the obnoxious gases that come from burning fecal matter with diesel can cause lung problems, later on in life. But one of the things we do is we can burn that. Now, urine, we don't have to worry about that. Just dispose of it. It just smells terrible. So garbage and fecal matter, we can either bury or we can burn. And you want to bury it deep enough to where the animals aren't going to dig it back up. Cover it with pebbles or rocks or something like that, so that you kind of de-incentivize the animals from digging it up. And then the average human produces about 2 to 3 pints of urine and about 1 pound of feces per day. So make plans on how you're going to dispose of all that. Yes, so you can carry wounded people on the on that body bag, LG. However, you might want to it's very flexible. Okay, so if somebody has an injury to the back or an injury to the neck, you probably don't want to use this unless you do something to stiffen it, maybe a door or some sort of a solid frame. We had scoopers, so and those are aluminum stretchers that for back injuries where you could actually scoop them up off the ground from where they are, and then it would not put any pressure on the spine itself. Yeah, so if it is a back injury or a neck injury, you probably don't want to use a flexible stretcher like this, okay? Let me see. If you're going to bury somebody, bury them at least 100 feet away from any water sources, not only away from you, but away from any water sources. Because as the body putrefies and decomposes, that's going to get mixed in with the soil. And so if it's very close to your water source, it can get mixed into your water source, and then it's going to do nasty things to your drinking water, and you don't want to do that. So always bury, if you take a look, usually they have boot hill, so they're going to bury the bodies on the side of a hill, going away from where your water source is, or any possible streams or trends where water will be carried into a drinking water stream or anything like that. If you are required to handle a dirty body, handle a dead body, try to wear disposable gloves. If you have any wounds, exposed cuts, bruises, abrasions, cover those and make sure that there's nothing that can get into that, because you never know what a body's going to do. I've got a story I can tell you when I was driving the ambulances. Cover it with a waterproof bandage or tape. Make sure you protect your eyes, and your nose, and your mouth from anything that may erupt from the body. If you can, wear a disposable gown or apron, and if possible, wrap the body in a body bag. So used to be you didn't have to be an EMT to drive an ambulance. And so I drove ambulances part-time. I was a married PFC in Monterey, California. I made $123.50 a month, and my rent was $105. So try to live off that. We were on food stamps. So I drove ambulances on the weekend when I was in language school. And my buddy, who was on the same ambulance with me, Chris Chenard, really great guy, but we had one assignment, and that was that we went up to San Francisco from Monterey to pick up a body, and the guy had passed away in a cancer ward. And so we went and picked him up, and we had him in the gurney. California law says if you're transporting anybody alive or dead, unless they're in a casket, you have to have somebody in the back with them. So I was driving. Chris was in the back. He had the light on because he was reading a book, and all of a sudden, two things happened at the same time. The body evacuated, and rigor mortis set in at the same time. So when the body evacuates, what happens is the lungs collapse, and all of a sudden there's this expulsion of gases from the mouth. Basically a very obnoxious burp. And at the same time, rigor mortis set in, his right hand just kind of elevated and rested on Chris's shoulder. So I heard this really terrible, we're on Highway 101 doing about 60 miles an hour. And I heard this really loud scream come from the back of the ambulance. I pulled over to the side of the road. Here's Chris, as white as a sheet. And this dead person's arm is sitting on his shoulder. And it was terrible. And Chris refused to get back in the back of the ambulance for the rest of the trip, and he wanted to drive. And I said, "No, you can't drive. You're too upset. I'm not going to let you drive." I said, "However, we will break the law together. We'll turn the lights off. I'll let you ride up front with me, and the two of us will make it together. And poor Chris, it took him, oh gosh, weeks to get over that. It was unbelievable. I can understand why, but it was very funny. It still is very funny. Um, but poor Chris. I did run into him later. So he's still alive and well, and his dad was the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. So he grew up in Switzerland, and he spoke native English, French, and German. And then he was studying. He was in my basic Russian class with me. So by the time it was all over, he spoke 4 languages. So just unbelievable. So then he's talking about wound care, and he had an ER doc that he interviewed and has his points in the book. And he says, that to avoid the antibacterial soap, because if there's one certain type he mentions in the book that has been known to reduce your ability to fight off bacteria. So, it's not the best antibacterial soap there is. And so he prefers Hibiclens. He says, and if you don't have it, then any No Tears baby shampoo is very good for disinfecting and cleaning. And he says that if you can't get that, another solution is to dilute some Dawn dishwater soap. And he said that's good for washing your hands. So I've read this book probably 5 years ago, but reading it again, it has totally convinced me we're going to get rid of it. We're going to use up our antibacterial soap and just buy Dawn dishwashing soap because it's so has so many uses. Just probably one of the best soaps around. Then he talks about sterile water, where you're going to use this sterile saline that you purchase at the store. If you don't have it, he says, then just go ahead and use tap water, water that has a flow and is going to wash out the wound or anything like that. Make sure you get anything that is inside the wound. That's a foreign object that's going to cause infection. So make sure you get any foreign particles out, steel knife blade, whatever the case is, a gravel or anything like that. Make sure you get all of that out. And he talks about one of the worst wounds that he's seen was caused by a chainsaw, and that the chainsaw, as it rips through the skin and the bone, also takes with it pieces of clothing and everything else. And so you have to do a lot of debridement, and that is cutting away of tissue because it's got so much clothing and wood chips and everything else, and it's just terrible. He says, and as he's talking about this, I'm thinking, of all the people who had artificial limbs in the Navy back, let's say before the beginning of the 20th century, back when we had wooden sailing ships instead of ironclad, and just think, that cannonball coming into the side of a wooden ship and all the splinters and all the wood and all those foreign objects, that was probably doing more damage to the human body than anything else, just all that splintered wood going into your body. And so people were just filled with splinters. And so that might be, if you're close enough, why they had so many peg legs or artificial arms or anything like that. Just unbelievable. And just think of that poor surgeon having to clean out all those wounds and take care of so many people all at one time. That's just unbelievable how they managed that at all. Fantastic My Prepper Journey. Yeah, I think I think he spelled it HIBI cleans, but anyhow, you've got the idea there. My Prepper Journey. Let me see. Okay. And this down here. One of the other things he talks about is you can use a blood pressure cuff to stop venal bleeding. So, you can put a sphygmomanometer around the upper portion of an external limb. So either the upper portion of the leg or the upper portion of the arm, get it up to pressure until the venal, that's the exterior oozing type of a blood rather than the squirting type of a blood. If it's squirting, you've got an arterial bleed. you're going to have to use a tourniquet. If it's an oozing bleed, just coming out, that's a venal bleed, and you can stop that usually with a blood pressure cuff around either the leg or the upper portion of the arm. And so he says he has used blood pressure cuffs for that purpose in the past. He also talks about not using Dermabond, which is basically the sterile glue that they're using a lot of now. One of my last surgeries, they used it in my belly button. I thought that was really neat. But he says, put pressure on the wound. This is that ER doctor talking. And if you release the pressure, it still continues to bleed. Do not put any Dermabond on it. And also don't do it for any stab wounds or deep wounds, and because you want those to irrigate. So the blood is actually carrying any infection or anything else out. So you want it to bleed slightly and cause it to continue to cleanse itself. And then a stressed wound would be one that's on a joint, like a finger or finger joint, elbow, something like a joint. There could also be a compression type of a wound. He emphasizes, and this is one of my pet peeves, he emphasizes on page 167, and this is a line all by itself in the middle of the page. It says, suturing should not be done by untrained individuals, especially in a non-sterile environment. And that's why I don't have a suture kit. That's why I don't have a staple kit. I have plenty of Steri-Strips. I have plenty of butterfly closures. I have all the things that I need to close a wound, simply because his opinion, my opinion. And then I asked the EMTs on a live that was, who was it? That was Van City Prepper had a fantastic 1 hour live, and she had on 5 different EMTs, medics, combat medics, and people like that. And I asked them their question about sewing or stapling in a non-sterile environment. And they said, oh no, because, and what you're doing is you're adding 2 additional puncture wounds, 2 more opportunities for infection to get in for every closing. So, just do it some other way other than through sewing or staples. And the other point there is that, you don't know if you're going to be doing any nerve damage or tissue damage in the site where you're actually doing that on your own. So, that's something you have to take into consideration. My understanding, LG, is that canned, pre-canned waters are good forever. Okay. So any deep wound, you want the blood to continue at a small pace. You want it to come out so that it's cleansing anything from down deep. So make sure you treat them with oral antibiotics. That's another good reason to have this stuff. Right now, there is an amoxicillin shortage in the U.S. 80% of our amoxicillin is provided by China. What are we going to do if 80% of our antibiotics come from China? What are we going to do if we go to war with them? Oh gosh, that's going to be terrible. Your goal with any kind of wound treatment is to keep the wound as clean and dry as possible. So, with burns, you want to use a non-sticking, sterile, something like Kelfa brand. And that's the dressing you're going to put over it. And then you can put a bandage over that. And then you can use just regular sterile cotton for any other kind of wound. Remember, however, it's going to scab. And so you're going to want to use a little bit of sterile water to kind of loosen that up before you pull it off. You're going to pull the scabs off and it's going to start bleeding again. So be very, very cautious with that when you're changing dressings. However, if a yellow or green discharge, pus, is present, you may need to partially open the wound, that is, irrigate it a little bit and allow that pus to come out and allow it to drain, or else you can have septicemia forming. You should also take into consideration tetanus. Now, we aren't going to have tetanus shots available to us in a post-SHT environment. That's another one of those preventive things you can do right now is make sure that all of your immunizations are up to date. Make an appointment with your doctor. Check on all, yellow fever, MMP, tetanus. Make sure you're completely up to date on all of your preventive immunizations. If you have chronic diseases, make sure you care for those. 1 second after by Fortune, one of the things he points out that's very near and dear to my heart is he talks about the grueling death of somebody who is a type 1 diabetic. We have a brittle type 1 diabetic in our house. So I have done so many different things just to try to make sure that I can keep any insulin that I have at the proper temperature and it doesn't go long, so I can prolong the life as long as possible. So, if you have somebody with a chronic disease, make sure that you're including that in your plans. If they need a CPAP machine, then are you going to have a means of providing electricity at least while they're asleep, so that they can power the CPAP machine? If they need oxygen, what kinds think about the chronic illnesses that you have in your family and what can you do in order to provide that type of treatment or protocol to them so that they can survive. Maybe that you need to include adding some cool refrigerated medications for them. So, take that part into consideration as well. Now, he talks about stabilizing injuries and splints, of course, using splints and backboards. This is kind of redundant to what he's talking about before. And so we've kind of pretty much talked about that, that you can use your SAM splint. That's a fantastic one. I used to carry pieces of 1/4-inch plywood in my first aid kit before the SAM splint. That SAM splint's a relatively new invention. I think it only came out like at the turn of the millennium. We used to use either aluminum wire cages with no padding, or we would use wooden splints. And then, of course, they came out later for the leg with traction splints. I mean, it's been some of the stuff that we have now available to us, medical technology as far as stabilizing splints and stabilizing backs and necks during times of injury is just unbelievable. So check into it. Consider getting that as part of your first aid kit. I don't know the answer to that, Janae. Here's what I do know. I talked to the pharmacist when I went to get my flu shot. I had a banter with the pharmacist and who was giving me the shot because I'm allergic to formaldehyde and formoterol, so I can't have anything formaldehyde, formoterol, which are the two largest forms of curing, a preservation of both soaps and stuff like that, as well as medications. So I can't have any medications that's got preservative in it. And so he and I were bantering forth about the flu shot. And I said, well, make sure it's a senior shot. I'm a senior. He says, as if I couldn't tell. So we're having this great exchange. And I said, I want to ask you a question. I said, I need Novolog in a post-SHTF environment. He knew what SHTF was, so I was very happy with that. And he says, do you have a prescription? I said, oh, yeah. He says, well, Novolog is going to be kind of hard to replace. That's a very specific type of insulin. He says, now I have these two types that are over the counter, but it's a totally different concept in using Novolog. And so Novolog is injected through a pump and it's constant injection, whereas the other two are over the counter. You can get them, but you do need a prescription for the syringes in order to inject them. So one's a short term, what you inject yourself with when you eat, just before eating. There's a long-term insulin, that keeps your body relatively stable other than during eating times over the course of about 12 hours. So both of those need to be refrigerated as well. I don't know about other types of insulins. So if he was just diagnosed as type 1, if you're giving him injections, if you're taking a blood sample before he eats and then giving him a short term, how many carbs is he going to be consuming, and then injecting that amount of insulin into him just prior to eating, Those are available over the counter, and they have to be refrigerated, but you can get those over the counter, relatively inexpensive, $30 a vial. And so, yes, those are available. And yes, they do have to be refrigerated. But, the good news is they are available to you. A lot easier than Novolog, which is the one that's on a continuous pump. Lantus, I believe, I don't know. I don't know the story about Lantus. I wish I did. And the same thing with glucophage. I think glucophage you also have to have a prescription for. Hello, freedom fighter. Welcome, or firefighter. Okay, then the last several pages of the chapter, he discusses labor and delivery and some of the things you might want to have in case you're going to be doing L&D in your post-apocalyptic first aid infirmary. I'm not going to get into those because it can be quite tedious, but I recommend that you read those. 8 pages? He gets into very detailed the equipment needed that you need to have on hand and how to go about the birthing process. So, gosh, we're already 11 minutes after 9. We've been an hour and 11 minutes. Unbelievable. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions we need to answer here. Janae, how old is your son? I just out of curiosity. Because we're 9. Okay, good. My daughter's best friend, so they were in the dance squad together in high school. They graduated in 2007, and but then Allison went off to college, and she graduated in 2011, and her best friend graduated from nursing school. So, but she had a child, and I think that her daughter is now 14, just about ready to just went into high school. And so she has been a type 1 since about age 7. And so she's doing very well. And I think the recommendation about keeping a log on what he eats, how much either short-term or long-term insulin you're giving him, and then how his body reacts to that, you can pretty much take a look at the cycles of the body and come up with an idea of what you're going to need and how you're going to need it. I would, once you have finished talking to your endocrinologist, about treating and regimen and everything else, then I would go to your local pharmacist and have just ask them, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Let's talk diabetes, and let's talk an insulin regimen, and let's talk, how do I manage this? And then if the world goes to hell, what can I do to enable, the best possible care under the circumstances for him? And so he may recommend, some other alternatives for you. When I was in the hospital system, I used to be HR director at a hospital, and one of the things that the pharmacist was working on very hard, they really wanted to get it this way, was thank you, freedom fighter. Very much appreciated. Now, I would like for you to go to my to my channel and see how I use those funds. So 30% of that money you've just donated is going to be used. 40% goes to our local food bank. 20% goes to the Texas Baptist Children's Home. And as you can tell by St. Francis here, I'm not Baptist. And then 20% goes to, equipment to make the transmissions better. And then the other 20% I'm going to give away as prizes, especially when I hit 5,000 subscribers. We're going to give away some stuff. So I've been acquiring some stuff with that. So that's how your money is going to be used. Thank you very much. The citizens in our community who aren't as privileged as we are going to get some good food as a result of that. And the Texas Baptist Children's Home, I'm sure that some of the children there will find some benefit from it as well. So I just want to let you know that's how your money is going to be used. So thank you very, very much. But anyhow, Janae, so have that conversation both with your endocrinologist as well as with your um, pharmacist. Because as I was saying, when I was at the hospital, the pharmacist wanted the doctors to do the diagnosis, and then they would do the prescriptions to match that diagnosis. That's how they were trying to get that to go. But we'll see how that works. Maybe that'll be successful in the future because the pharmacist actually knows more about medications and their effects than do the doctors, although the doctors know them extremely well. But those are the two people I'd have that discussion with. Okay, any other questions or comments before we call it to quits? Let me get here. I think next week we're going to be talking about a couple more really good chapters here. So next week we're going to be talking about communications and home security, chapters 9 and 10. If you don't have the book, this is the book we're discussing. It's James Wesley Rawles, the How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It, Tactics, Techniques, and Technologies for Uncertain Times. And it looks like it's becoming more and more important that we have these concepts well formed in our minds as we face the future. So, please, a thumbs up would be greatly appreciated. And once we stop, tomorrow morning, I'll go back in and put any links to things that you may find beneficial for things like this. I'll warn you, I do get a 10% commission if you use my Amazon link. But just as with the donations and just as with the people the checks I get from people watching the videos, 40% goes to the local food bank. We call it the Caring Place here in Williamson County. So 40% goes to the Caring Place, 20% to Texas Baptist Children's Home, and 20% gets dispersed back out to you, my subscribers, in the form of gifts when we reach certain milestones. So I'll put a link to a lot of this stuff, the SAM splint, the CPR mask, the hydration equipment, and things like that. And if you want to buy it that way, please feel free to. If you want to just take a look at it, thank you, Freedom Firefighter. Wow, you are so so generous. I can't believe it. I'm just flabbergasted. Thank you so much. And then with that, I guess we're all kind of interested in how the elections are going. So why don't we call it a quits for tonight? Let me get the book of Numbers out here for you. And this is one of the most important things we can do is this is how Aaron was instructed to bless the Levitical priests. So this is Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So remember, we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other. We're all God's creatures, and togetherness is the key. Take care. Bye-bye.